Welcome back to Finding Perfect Property, Diary of a Buying Agent. Happy New Year. We're absolutely delighted to be in our second year of hosting Finding Perfect Property. And what better way to start the new year than with a topic which everyone loves to hate, tax. In this episode, I'm really thrilled to be chatting to Nimesh Shah, who is CEO of Blick Rothenberg, a leading tax, accounting and business advisory firm, and stamp duty guru Sean Randall, a tax partner at Blick Rothenberg with 20 years Big Four stamp duty experience. With a general election looming this year, we really couldn't think of a better tax power duo to discuss all things tax in this episode, including how a Labour win might affect the super prime London property market. Sean and Nimesh, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the episode today. It's great to have you here.
Pleasure.
So I always love to start my podcast by asking my guests how they got into their careers. What was their journey? Nimesh, can I start with you?
Yeah, this won't take too long to eat into the episode too much. So I fell into a career in tax, and it is tax. I'm not an accountant. I'm not an auditor. I applied for a gap year between university and school to join a private client business at a Big Four firm back then. And I just fell in love with working with people. It was very real, rather than doing auditing, rather than sort of a slightly a gap in terms of who you engage with as the stakeholder. So working with private clients, my advice meant something to them. You could see that tangible feeling. And the ecosystem then around private clients, people like yourself, private banks, lawyers as well, that community is really close-knit in private client. So I've been in this industry now for over 20 years, dare I say it. And I moved away from that Big Four firm. And you might be able to tell from my accent, I'm not from around here. So originally from the north, and moved to London to join Blick Rothenberg because I wanted to join a firm that had private client at the core of what we do. And we've talked before that is exactly what Blick Rothenberg is, even now that we've grown exponentially in the time that I've been there over the past 11 years, that at the heart of Blick Rothenberg, private client is absolutely critical. And I suppose now in the role that I do now as leading the firm, which is a very privileged role, and it's my opportunity to give back to our people because the firm has been really good to me in terms of supporting me and my development. It should say a lot to the world that a non-accountant, non-auditor, but a private client person is now steering the ship.
Yeah, which is amazing. And as CEO, are you still involved with clients?
So not as much as I'd like to be, being honest. So I have about 10 or so clients that I still act for. And I'm really, really hands-on with them. So if I am going to still be responsible for their affairs, it's really, really important that they still get the same level of engagement from me as they would have done in my old role. But unfortunately, I can't take on more clients now because I have a responsibility to the people in the firm and making sure that we continue to grow, continue to give people the right opportunities. But I take a great interest in tax, as you said at the outset, Camilla, that is maybe a bit of a hobby of mine. And sad as that sounds, and much to my wife's disdain. So I do spend quite a lot of my spare time still reading about tax policy and commentating in the media, being invited to consultations. And I was fortunate enough to go to the Labour Party conference last year to talk about one of the things that I think we're going to touch on, which is non-doms. So those experiences that tax has opened up for me, and what is probably a very dry, dull subject and makes people shiver, again, as you said at the start, the opportunities that it's given me during my career to meet some of the most prolific business people in the world, some of the wealthiest people and the most interesting people in the world. I'm very, very lucky to have tax at the core of my own life and my career.
Yeah, it'd be fascinating to be a guest at one of your dinner parties, I'm sure, Nimesh.
It wouldn't be that interesting.
Sean, you are very interesting. I don't think I know anyone else in the industry that I would refer to as the stamp duty guru. And I think on the Blick Rothenberg website, that it says that if you were a tree and we cut you in half, the veins running through you would say stamp duty or something like that.
Terrific.
I might not have got that quite right, but you know, you've built your career on advising private clients, and not just private clients, but the industry, people like me, estate agents, legal advisors, you know, everybody really on stamp duty. If anyone ever has a question on stamp duty, you're the name that comes up, which is phenomenal. How did you choose that path?
Well, I mean, what an introduction. Thanks, Camilla. So I qualified as a lawyer and originally intended to do criminal law, like my wife, and quickly learnt that actually it didn't pay very well and it wasn't a particularly nice subject, and fell into tax. And very quickly in my educational tax, stamp duty stood out, because back then, before 2003 in particular, it was sensitive to contract law, land law and equity, and those are core legal subjects. So, I developed a passion in understanding how it worked, and then SDLT came in 2003, and that's developed into quite a complicated tax. And it's been, intellectually very stimulating, still is. If I didn't enjoy it, and if I wasn't challenged by the subject, I just wouldn't do it anymore. Yeah. So I'm not sure what that says about the tax system, that it takes a specialist 20 plus years to not even begin to actually really grapple with all the subjects and understand how it all works. It's still very stimulating.
And we've got George Osborne perhaps to thank for the fact that it's so complicated.
He's my best friend. Yeah.
He's kept you busy over the years. And you've written books on stamp duty. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so I mean, huge privilege to edit and write a book which is used by the industry and sometimes judges in their judgments, called Sargent and Sims, big plug. I've been doing that for almost 15 years, I think. So I get to put my own view, but it's a reasoned view of what the correct interpretation of the legislation is. And, that's only my personal view, but I express why I believe what I do. But more recently, I wrote a book specifically for conveyances, recognising that actually they're at the coalface, dealing with very complicated stamp duty subjects, and are reasonably expected to understand stamp duty by their customers. And some of the largest law firms understandably struggle. So imagine the impact on the kind of high volume, low margin conveyances on the high streets.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we're always very careful with our clients, trying to encourage them to work with one of our preferred law firms, not for any other reason that, they're very, very good. And there's just so many bad real estate lawyers out there.
Good real estate lawyers are worth their weight in gold, as you know. I mean, they make a huge difference, don't they?
Absolutely. And if you were, both of you, this is a question for both of you, if you were sort of talking to your younger selves, or perhaps just a young person in general that was interested in getting involved in private client tax, and your fields in particular, what advice would you give them, Nimesh?
I think, sure. Well, look, Sean touched on this about why would both of us get out of bed in the morning, which is the intellectual challenge. And things have changed so much in the world of taxation. Slightly, it's become a politicised subject as well. It's been front page news, and that has meant there's been lots and lots of changes, which I suppose keeps us on our toes. For someone coming into the profession or thinking about, do I want to be a tax advisor? Do I want to work in private clients specifically? The key bit of advice is be inquisitive. Inquisitive about your subject matter. You've got no choice, I suppose, because it does change quite a lot, but be inquisitive about your clients. Clients are really interesting beasts. They've got so much going on in their lives, and asking those questions about what it means to them, what do you want to achieve, it opens up such a massive opportunity, and also relationship building with that client. That if you get to know the DNA of your client, I firmly believe that firstly, it's hugely interesting for me, but you also get to advise them in a way which isn't just giving them the textbook answer, it's actually making very real and relevant and personal to them. And I touched on it before, saying the value that I can then physically see in the advice that I'm giving, that's really fulfilling.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's great advice, isn't it? In any field, is just find out as much as you can about your clients, and then, by doing that, hopefully you can help them, with other areas. Really great advice. Sean?
Yeah, I mean, look, I agree with that. For me, the advice is always to put yourself in their shoes and to understand whether what you're saying is relevant, clear, accurate. It's anyone can recite legislation. The rules, understanding the rules is a given.
Yeah.
Yeah, but expressing yourself clearly in a commercial way so that it's understood and it's responsive too. I mean, simple things really matter. And it's how you deliver the advice and making sure that it's understood and accepted. That's really important. It's not rocket science.
Yeah.
Is it? You just want to be treated, or you want to treat someone the way that you would expect to be treated, no?
Which is why we have a lot of debate internally, because AI is a faddy term in our world now.
Yeah.
And for all the reasons Sean said, I don't think, certainly me and Sean are not going to be out of jobs in this generation. I don't think even the next generation as well, because AI won't be able to empathise in the same way and ask the same questions.
Yeah.
Or a client won't know the questions to ask that we would do and make that advice relatable, as Sean's saying.
Agreed. It still feels quite robotic, AI. I think it doesn't, it's not quite there with the personal touch. I think it will evolve over time. It will affect all of our industries, but it's still, yeah, I think it's a long way off. So I would agree. We're not out of jobs yet. We can breathe easy. I want to move on to 2024. This year is going to be quite an important year, I think, for our industries, both property, tax. Very likely that we're going to have a general election this year. I think they'll have to call it. They won't wait till the last minute. And at the moment, all the polls are suggesting that we will have a Labour government. So I just want to talk a little bit around what that might mean for private clients and also for the property industry. I'm going to start with you, Sean. One of the policies that Labour say they want to introduce is to raise stamp duty by a further 2% for foreign buyers. If I'm not mistaken, that takes the top rate to 17%, but I'm sure you'll correct me.
Almost 19%. Wow. So at the moment, the top rate effectively is 17%. Whether it's a flat rate or marginal rate depends, but we'll increase it now to 19%, almost as much as VAT, Camilla.
Wow.
Yeah. And what was the rate in 2012?
4%.
4%. Those were the days. Anyway. So yeah, I think the idea is, from recollection, that they're going to hypothecate the tax and earmark it towards affordable housing. The trouble with that, I think, is predicting a decrease in volume. Hopefully that prediction is wrong, but if you take into account a reduction in volume by 10%, then the estimated increase or collection of revenue from this 2% increase is about 130 million. It's not very much. It's not going to make a big impact, in terms of the provision of affordable housing. So it's probably not going to be financially or economically effective. Is it going to deter foreign buyers? I think that's a really key question for you too, Camilla. But my sense is probably won't stop foreign buyers buying, homes in the way that a complete ban would, as there is in Canada, or a huge increase, as there is in Singapore. Yeah. The top rate there for additional buyer stamp duty for non-residents is 60%.
That's insane. So that just killed the market completely.
I imagine. Yeah. But so it's not going to be fiscally effective. It's not going to deter people either. It's not going to produce a lot of income. So what is it? It's probably, if I have to say it, a political device, a political gimmick. Yeah. And I'm not sure whether, these hypothecated taxes work. I mean, is the revenue actually applied? So when the 2% rate for non-residents was introduced originally, that was designed to be earmarked for homelessness. And I haven't heard any kind of news about, that revenue making a big impact on homelessness. I just wonder whether that's a way of generating votes, and in fact, whether it is actually used for the stated purpose. I don't know. I'm sure
you're probably right. I think the shame of it all is that it makes the headlines, and I think it absolutely affects confidence. And I think that in terms of foreign buyers, every country in the world wants to attract wealth, and I think they use these things as a reason why not to buy in the UK and why to buy in places like Dubai, for example. They're all over our politicizing of tax.
Yeah, I completely agree. One important point, which hopefully has been understood and recognised, I'm not sure it has, is that a major part of the provision of affordable homes is Section 106 agreements. So these are the obligations on a developer when they get planning permission to provide affordable housing. And the viability of schemes, new build housing schemes, is dependent on selling flats off plan. And the major market for buyers off plan are non-residents. Yeah. If you take away that market, you're impacting on the viability of schemes. If you take away new builds, then you're taking away affordable housing. 50% of affordable housing is generated from 106 agreements. So I'm not sure whether it might be counterproductive.
Yeah, I think, and I just wonder whether there's been any sort of consultation on this as well, and whether they've spoken to people like you, Sean, to sort of say, well, what will this do to the market? Is it a good idea? I mean, have Labour consulted with anyone before sort of announcing this is one of their policies?
Not to my knowledge.
Yeah, extraordinary. And I want to move on to ways in which clients might be able to save money on their property transactions. I mean, we, over the years, have fielded many phone calls from various, I don't know what to call them, firms, individuals claiming that they can save our clients lots of stamp duty through weird and wonderful schemes. What are your thoughts on that? Are there any legitimate ways for clients to save on their stamp duty bill in 2024?
There are, but there's no simple solution, and it's very fact specific. So firstly, there's nothing preventing, from a tax perspective, a buyer choosing to buy the shares in the company that already owns the property. So corporate deals do not attract SDLT. There's no indirect charge on sales of shares in land-rich companies. There might be in the future, but at the moment there aren't. And one consequence of increasing stamp duty to possibly 19% might be to make those kind of corporate deals even more financially attractive. Yeah. So one corporate deals, particularly in prime, super prime properties, might be still something for buyers to think about. The huge issues, not just tax issues, connected with buying a company. The other thing I see more frequently is people buying plots and then and completing their purchase of a plot with no house yet built on it, and then paying the developer, the seller, to build a house on it. Yeah. Now, those kind of deals, builder-vendor deals, were very common for large private rented sector developments for many years, because economically it was, attractive and viable to do that. But it's a reflection of the increase in rates in stamp duty that actually now that's becoming quite popular for single plot sales. Perhaps in London that's not necessarily a very common...
In the countryside, I did one at the Lakes by you.
Possibly, yes. The other thing is people buying multiple units. So as soon as you get to 6 units, it might be one single building composed of 6 studios, or it might be 6 physically disparate houses or flats. When you get to 6, it's a commercial deal. Yeah. And that means that the stamp duty rates fall significantly from 19% possibly to, what's the flat rate for 5%? Massive. So 14% saving. Yeah. And, we've worked on deals, haven't we, Nimesh, where actually someone is buying something so expensive that it makes economic sense to buy more units to get up to 6, and then they achieve a stamp duty savings. So they're benefiting and paying less tax by buying more. Yeah.
And also mixed use as well. So we're looking at something at the moment for a client where they may sort of add a retail unit into, it's obviously owned by the same seller. I think that's important, isn't it? That they're all linked, so it has to be owned by the same seller. But, adding that into the mix of the residential apartments to, again, lower that stamp duty rate to 5%.
Yeah, mixed use varies according to the facts. I mean, it can be a very robust structure, or it can be a very, dodgy structure. But
speak to you is the key.
Well, it's all about whether, in fact, the provision of the non-residential element it has been contrived, and whether it has real value, and there are real consequences for both parties in terms of selling that non-residential element. But you're right. It's a potential saving.
So for investors, potentially not so gloomy. It's still 5% if you're bulk buying.
Yes, and we've seen, for example, a shift. Maybe it's, I might exaggerate this in saying it's a huge shift or a trend, but I've seen on a couple of occasions foreign buyers buying 2 units for investment. And obviously they're going to be hit with the non-resident surcharge and the additional dwelling surcharge too. Whereas if they can find 2 more people and collectively buy 6, well, then it becomes a non-residential deal and they benefit from a bulk purchase discount. So those kind of club deals might also be something that people wish to look at going forwards for investment.
Yeah, I think. And could they use those units for their own use as well, or are they obligated then to rent them out?
No, they could use them for themselves. Yeah. If they're using a company to do so, then there are significant punitive charges if they wish to occupy, even if they pay rent. Yeah. But if they're buying them in their personal names individually, perhaps even via a partnership, those rules don't apply. Yeah.
Well, we'll just have to wait and see then what happens and when this gets introduced and if it gets introduced and whether it's an overnight introduction, which, you know, just plays havoc with the market, doesn't it? Because you have a whole rush of people trying to get their things through right before the change comes in and this big spike in transactions.
Well, the worst thing are the rumours. Yeah. So when something is trailed, you know, 2 weeks before an autumn statement or a budget, then people don't know what to do. And it paralyses the market, doesn't it, for two weeks or so?
We shall have to wait and see. Nimesh, I want to move on now and ask you a few questions about what a Labour win might mean for private clients. I think, again, I think Labour have been quite good in calming some nerves and saying that they don't plan to bring in a mansion tax. They don't plan to bring in sort of punitive wealth taxes. So I think nerves are settled somewhat. However, I think one of their key policies, if I'm not mistaken, is around UK res non-dom tax rules and the planning to abolish those. And if we just look at the numbers, how many people that might affect, there are approximately almost 69,000 UK res non-doms in the UK in the tax year ending 2022. And they contribute around £8 billion a year to the UK economy. And Labour is saying they want to effectively stop these people from living in the UK and under the current UK res non-dom tax rules as they are at the moment and abolishing those. For the benefit of listeners listening today who perhaps might not be familiar with what all that means, I think it would be useful just to have your take on what is a UK res non-dom, what does that mean? And then your views as well on if that status is taken away and removed, what does that mean for these people?
Yeah, so worth touching on what it is to begin with, Camilla. So the way I try and explain this to, say, a new client coming in for the first time, because we have a very unusual tax system in the UK. So basically we have two parallel tax systems for individuals, one for all of us here. If I take myself, I was born in the UK. I've lived here all my life. I've never worked anywhere. The only time I've been abroad is when I've been on holiday. I am British through and through. So I'm UK resident, UK domiciled. But for someone who's moving to the UK with an overseas origin, so their parents, I mean, the domicile will follow their father, actually. It's a very archaic concept, quite sexist concept as well, that it follows your father. Yeah. But if your father had a non-UK origin and you then came to the UK, you have a secondary tax regime, which we cannot access, which basically means you're taxed on your UK sources of income and gains, but anything you earn abroad is only taxed here to the extent you bring it here, you remit it here, and that regime is called the remittance basis, and this has been part of our tax system for 300 years. It's had various iterations during that time, but we've seen a big raft of changes, actually the time that I've been practicing over the last 20 years as well, where the benefit and the scope of the remittance basis regime for non-dom individuals has been more narrowed, but it's a really, really valuable tax regime. It's been the envy of certainly the European jurisdictions about attracting, well, you mentioned about attracting wealth to the UK. Yeah. So the non-dom regime, with all the other benefits that the UK has, and in particular London has, around its culture, history, schooling, lifestyle, the tax regime has certainly been one of those incentives to bring people into the UK. So what Labour are proposing to do, and they say this every week, every opportunity that they're in front of the camera or in the newspapers, we are going to abolish the non-dom regime. Partly it's politicised. I think, Sean, you touched on this with stamp duty, that there is a perceived unfairness that we have a secondary tax regime which disproportionately benefits people coming into the UK or people that have a non-UK origin. So why should they be able to save taxes on their overseas income and gains? Now, the figure that Labour have latched onto is based on some university research, probably the most comprehensive research that I've seen in my time. So access to HMRC's data lab and access to confidentially HMRC taxpayer records as well. And that statistical analysis is saying that we think by abolishing the non-dom regime, the UK will raise in taxes an additional 3.2 billion. I was fortunate enough to be able to input into some of that research as well with the very clever university professors at the time. Now, what that research doesn't do, and the research team is absolutely on board with this, is that it doesn't analyse, well, what's the economic impact on property, on buying agents, on spending in restaurants, all of the ancillary economic multiplier effects. that someone with wealth coming into the UK may spend, and maybe that's where the 8 billion figure comes from that's been quoted by Jeremy Hunt. Now, the worry for me, and it's something that I've sort of pushed back on to the research think tank, has been, well, we've got some analysis of, if we abolish the non-dom regime, will we see an exodus out of the UK? Now, it's saying not, because in 2017, we had a big rewrite of the non-dom regime, which basically curtailed the benefit of this regime to 15 years. Before then, you could have it forever. And they're saying, well, not many people actually left, which is true. But the other part of it is, how many more people will come into the UK without a favourable tax regime? And other jurisdictions have popped up with their own, in particular, the ones that have got lots of attention as places like Portugal, Spain, Greece, Croatia. They've all developed a form of a non-dom regime. Italy, I should have mentioned as well, which has been one of the pioneers in Europe, trying to copy what our non-dom regime has been. They've all done it with various degrees of success, and actually Portugal has now recently announced it's closing its equivalent because, again, of social pressure in Portugal. But the UK could end up shooting itself in the foot about how we then attract the right wealth and the right investment to the UK without a compelling tax incentive for people still to come and relocate here.
And of course, no tier one investor visa anymore as well.
And that as well. And I think no one has talked about that for the last couple of years. And there's been no signal, for as far as I'm aware, that there's going to be a replacement of that particular regime. If I go back to maybe just 10 years ago, the UK was incredibly attractive with its tier one regime, with a non-dom regime which was a little bit more generous than what we've got right now. We don't have really those entry points and attractiveness maybe to come into the UK. Look, London still has a huge attraction, a huge pull for all those reasons that we know here that I touched on before. And people will still keep coming into the UK and London. I firmly believe that. But I suppose the Labour Party do need to think very carefully. Rachel Reeves needs to think very carefully about, do we go the full-blown whole hog abolishing non-dom regime, which is what they say every Sunday on the Laura Kuenssberg show, and it's going to pay for 50,000 frontline nurses and doctors and solve the UK's infrastructure problems. I mean, I've heard that money's getting spent 15, 20 times over. It's not raising that much. 3 billion is a tiny amount, and the impact and the damage that it could have on the wider financial ecosystem in the UK, and also the attractiveness of the UK as a place to do business and a place to relocate. When other countries are fighting for that wealth, I do worry about that. And I hope that if and when we do get a Labour government, that there will be some more deeper analysis beyond the very good research that's been done. But I think there needs to be a full-blown Treasury impact assessment on what it would mean to have zero non-dom regime. I think we'll end up in a position where the Labour government will look at the real cost of abolishing it, and we will get to a place where there will be some kind of tax incentive into the UK, but it may not be called non-dom. It may be called something else.
Okay, so a little light at the end of the tunnel. They may not be quite as draconian and drastic as they say at the moment. That it might be more measured when they get into power.
I think so, and I've got huge respect for Rachel Reeves. She comes across as a very sensible economist, really. She had a good stint at the Bank of England. She talks very sensibly, and also I've been encouraged the fact that both Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer have been talking to lots of the business groups, a lot of the CEOs of the banks and the insurance companies, the private equity industry, and they have, I think you said before, Camilla, they have tempered some of their noises around 50% income tax, doubling CGT. Some of those things have gone away. Now, the challenge that any incoming Labour Chancellor is going to have is, well, where does the money come from then? Because if I look at the Labour policies that have been talked about now, non-doms, potential changes to private equity carried interest, VAT on private school fees, increasing the windfall tax. If you add all of that up, it's about 18 billion. It's really not very much. When we're talking about frozen tax allowances, which impact everyone, the entire population of the UK, that raises 20 billion a year. So with all the spending pledges that I expect a new government will want to have, I would assume, and history suggests this, when you have a new government come in, that first budget after the election, there will be some bad news.
Okay, we'll just have to wait and see. I've got one more question for you, Nimesh, which is when you're advising clients on potential changes to their tax status, so people thinking about whether they want to be domiciled here or not. What factors do you think clients need to weigh up in determining whether to maintain or alter their residency arrangements?
Oh, well, first of all, don't think about tax. And that's coming from a tax advisor. I've seen so many occasions with client situations. We could do several podcasts just on the anecdotes that I'm sure between me and Sean we've got.
Yeah.
But please don't plan just purely on tax. When you're thinking about changing your residency and thinking about moving to a different country, look, London's got loads, or the UK and London have got loads and loads of benefits, loads of draws. And life is more than tax.
Yeah.
So we can make the tax fit. And again, coming back to the type of advice that I think I provide, that the team around me at Blick Rothenberg do provide, that it's very practical around your personal circumstances. If you need to pay a bit more tax, but have a happy life and a happy family around it, that is worth more than any tax liability.
I think that's just brilliant advice. I remember my late father used to say to me when he sort of saw people, he was a real estate developer, and he would see some of his peers move to Monaco, and he would say, I'd rather live in London and pay my tax than live in Monaco and be bored to death.
Pretty miserable.
People that are involved in Monaco won't thank me for that, but that's very insightful. Thank you. I'm going to move on to sort of the end of our podcast now. We always like to finish by sort of asking our guests what their top tips are going to be. So, and this question is for both of you. So, Sean, I'll come to you first. What would your top tax planning advice for high net worth individuals in 2024 be?
Wow. Get advice soon. Use a good lawyer. Interrogate the facts. So one thing that I see very often is that people make false assumptions about how much tax they will pay. So obviously, from my perspective, stamp duty is the most relevant tax.
Yeah.
And understandably, people assume that they'll either pay a higher amount or a lower amount, and they'll make decisions on funding and offer a price and based on those assumptions, and they may be completely wrong. So much better to take some informal advice, possibly through your lawyer. They'll be super, if they're using a good lawyer, they'll be super adept in understanding some of these nuances regarding non-resident surcharge, the 3% additional dwelling surcharge, and price that in initially. Equally, another top tip is be very aware of some exaggerated and, downright bad advice and sort of schemes which are being offered still on the dark web. So if it feels intuitively wrong, too good to be true, it really is. And although these things don't bite initially, not even within the first year or 2 years, sometimes the drag is 5 to 10 years before a scheme actually, is determined and the conclusion is reached. But my goodness, after 5 or 10 years, the interest and the penalties and the other financial impact is just not worth it.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant advice. If it's too good to be true, avoid. And Nimesh, what would your top tips be for clients this year?
I don't think it's just this year, Camilla. I think I look back on certainly over the last 7-8 years in particular, and the climate of tax. And as I said before, it's front page news these days. It's hugely politicised, hugely socialised as well. And then that has meant the attitude of HMRC has certainly become more aggressive, and rightly so, to collect the right amount of tax. Don't always agree with the methods and the approaches HMRC may take, and some of the legislation, the tools they now have can be incredibly penal. But the sleep at night factor for me is absolutely paramount.
Yeah.
And it's like maybe touching on some of the things that Sean was saying as well. So yeah, do get advice around your situation, and don't underestimate the value of the sleep at night factor, and making sure that actually sounds very boring, but make sure your compliance is up to date, make sure your payments are there. HMRC can give you a very, very hard time. And we have unfortunately seen that wealth has become a dirty word, especially at the height of the pandemic. And there is maybe an agenda in certain parts of the civil service and government and HMRC where it has been targeting that level of wealth to recover more tax than maybe probably what there is. So unfortunately, wealthy individuals in particular are being targeted by those factions of HMRC. And so getting the right advice, doing things in the right way, very bespoke planning advice that's personal to you. There are lots of opportunities there to do the right things, but actually making sure your house is in order, I would put loads and loads of value on that. And I'm sorry if that doesn't sound very interesting, but I place a lot of emphasis on the risk and the compliance, and also, as I said before, I want to sleep at night. And if that means paying a little bit more tax to get it right, then that is worth so much more.
I think that's brilliant, brilliant top tip. And in terms of the run-up to the general election this year, do you think there's anything specific that clients should be thinking of? You know, I'm thinking about your UK res non-dom clients who are here at the moment and are perhaps quite worried. What would your advice be to them? Sit tight, wait and see?
I suppose, again, you can only plan with what the legislation says right now. And we've had loads of conversations with non-doms that are currently here, those that are thinking about coming to the UK. That is my advice. My advice is we have these rules right now. We shouldn't really be crystal ball gazing about what could happen, what may not happen. But I know certain clients will kick themselves by not doing something. They feel that they have to do something because if something changes in the future and they've missed out on a so-called opportunity, then they beat themselves up about it. If there are clients who are on that side, it comes back to actually knowing your client and knowing the psychology of what's important to them. Then look, there are certain things that one can do right now in terms of locking in the current benefit of the rules that we have. So setting up certain structures, including trusts. But again, my advice would be, let's get a bit of clarity around what these rules may look like. And as far as I'm aware right now, and sitting here with you in the new year, I'm not aware that Labour have got a fully formed policy about what they'll do with non-dom, what a replacement may look like, what the rules on trusts may look like. They haven't done that work. And being in opposition, they don't get the access to all the cleverly expensive treasury people. So we won't actually know, I don't feel, until there is that Labour win, if there is one in fact. And then they've done some work with the treasury, and hope that, again, my view, and it's not maybe widely shared amongst some of my peers, but I really hope that any incoming government will consult with the likes of me and Sean and the others in our network around what a non-dom regime should look like in the UK to attract the right type of wealth. If we're going to go down this route as a country, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to have a world-class tax regime that is simple, easy to understand, and attracts the right wealth into the UK. So that's a very long-winded way for me to say, I'm sit tight.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And on stamp duty, potential stamp duty changes, Sean, do you think foreign buyers should rush to get their deals done now?
Well, it feels like it's a good year to buy. I mean, really, it depends on stock and, residential property is an emotional asset, isn't it? And if you see the right property now, this year, why not buy it? It feels a good time to buy.
Yeah.
Particularly, interest rates seem stable. For those buying in the 1 to 5 million bracket, which possibly is most sensitive to debt, feels possibly a good time to buy.
Yeah, brilliant. I think there's amazing content there that we've covered, and brilliant top tips for all of our listeners. So thank you both very, very much for coming on Finding Perfect Property. It's been fascinating to hear your insights. And that brings us to the end of this month's episode, Diary of a Buying Agent. Thank you so much to Nimesh and Sean from Blick Rothenberg for their useful insights into what a Labour win might mean for private clients and the London property market. For more information about how to purchase property in prime central London, please get in touch via our website, and don't forget to like and subscribe on whichever podcast channel you use to listen. See you next time.